There are 21 games left in the regular season. Will the Royals be able to hang on? We'll dive into it in this edition of Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. You can also find us on wherever you get your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts. We're on Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you're a first-time listener and you want to know a little bit more about me and this show, well, I am based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB, doing some hosting, some co-hosting, and a little bit of producing as well. But when you come to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you're going to be getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off on your first purchase. Those terms apply. So download the Gametime app today. What time is it? It is game time. A little bit later of an episode tonight. As I had mentioned on Tuesday, I believe it was, so just yesterday, it was going to vary a little bit this week as to when I would get these podcasts out. Tomorrow, there might be an opportunity to get 2 episodes in. If I only get one tomorrow and one Friday, I expect to get one this weekend, so we'll have 5 episodes this week. And then we'll be back to a usual schedule, a routine schedule, Monday through Friday. So not to worry on that. Should be able to get to 5 episodes this week. Just don't know exactly when that final episode of the week will be coming. But it is a good feeling episode tonight as the Royals finally snapped their 7-game slide. They avoided the sweep against the Cleveland Guardians. And that's it against Cleveland, at least in the regular season for 2024. They go 8-5 in the 13 games. They'll get a very much needed off day tomorrow, and then they will welcome the Minnesota Twins for a 3-game series. Just, I believe, 6 games to go at Kauffman Stadium in the regular season. A lot of road series that include some National League opponents like the Washington Nationals, like the Pittsburgh Pirates, and like the Atlanta Braves. So the Twins and the Giants, the final teams left on the regular season schedule for the Royals at home. And then they will also play the Yankees, the Pirates, the Nationals, and the Braves on the road. Excuse me, I got that wrong. I said 6, actually 9, because they had the Tigers for 3 as well at Kauffman Stadium. So 9 games to go at home. Believe that would be 12 games to go left on the slate there for the regular season. Just 21 left. And as I'm doing this podcast, the Royals hold a 5.5 game lead over Boston. They are tied with Minnesota for the second wild card spot. And Detroit and San Diego are still playing. They're knotted up at 5 apiece. But by the time you watch this episode, that game will have concluded. So kind of a moot point when going over it. The good thing about today's episode was that I didn't have to really change any of the lineup today. I was trying to get this done before I had to go and host a show on 8:10 in the evening time, then had some other obligations. But I was planning to do this episode around 4:30 today. Just didn't have the time to get it done. So here I am recording it in the late hours of the evening. But it still, is the same thing that I was going to be talking about, whether the Royals were going to win tonight or they were going to lose. This was more so about a futuristic outlook for this team and where they stand and what their percentages are. And, this probably would have been better suited for last night after the Royals had lost their 7th straight, because I do believe one of my responsibilities as the host of this podcast, and I have absolutely loved doing this. It has been fun to interact with a lot of fans. It has been fun to enjoy a season like this, but it also can be difficult to do this podcast when things are so down, things are so negative, because you have some people that at least say they're jumping ship, and you don't want everybody to jump ship, because that means less viewers, less subscribers, less people to talk to when doing this thing. So yes, I think last night this episode would have been meant for a lot of people that were ready to give up on the team. The Chiefs play tomorrow. The focus would have been football at that point. Maybe you're a college football fan. My focus is there. But to me, it's still absolutely worthy of a baseball focused time period right now. This is a team that's in the hunt for a playoff spot. They have a very healthy and comfortable lead for a playoff spot, and it's all about hanging on at this point. That's really what it comes down to. Even last night, as I was leaving Kauffman Stadium, I had left the clubhouse, and there was nothing that you could really tell anybody to be optimistic about the team itself. But I'm also scoreboard watching at the same time of evaluating this Royals team and evaluating those that are chasing them. It really comes down to this month coming to an end, right? Every day that the Royals can find a way to win or the teams chasing them lose is another lost opportunity for those that are 4.5 back, 5.5 back, like Boston, like Detroit, like Seattle. Those teams are up against it now. They can't have a bad stretch. They can't get swept. They can't afford an injury to a key player, where, as much as I hate to say it, the Royals could at the point in time. I mean, Bobby Witt Jr. said it today that it's better to have a losing streak now than October, because you can't have a losing streak in October. You'll be eliminated and your season will be done. But to me, it's why I wasn't really melting down over a 7-game losing streak, because as bad as the Royals were playing, you could point to a variety of things. They were fatigued. They were tired. They had played 14 games in 13 days, all of which came against first place teams. But the bright thing was, or the positive thing was, everybody that had been begging for the Royals to have a stretch like this weren't capitalizing on it. They were choking away that opportunity. Boston has absolutely imploded and choked away that opportunity to gain some serious ground on Kansas City. Detroit has played the best ball of that bunch that's chasing Kansas City. And still, you look at, what they have stacked against them. They're still in a 4.5, 5.5 game deficit with 3 weeks to go. They do get to face Kansas City. They do get the White Sox on their schedule. They also got to face Baltimore 2 more times, I believe it is. There's some tough opponents out there, and they still got to take on San Diego. And this is a team that doesn't thrive offensively. So to me, even though the Royals aren't playing great baseball, and a win tonight doesn't really change that. They're 1-7 over their last 8 games. It's not really been that pretty. They're 3-7 over their last 10. That's not something you really hang your hat on. But this late in the year, I do think there is a disconnect between the fans and the players of what you need to be looking like when the season ends. I heard a few people and saw a few people that I interacted with on social media today about, well, I don't want to back into the playoffs. I don't want to be limping into the playoffs. I think the newsflash for a lot of people out there is it really doesn't matter how well or how poor you're playing going into October, because the reality is it's a completely different game. It is a night and day difference, right? Because at that point, you throw everything out the window. Batting averages, ERA, record. It does not matter at that point. Everybody gets a fresh start. And what you did back in July, what you did back in May, it just doesn't matter anymore. And that's why I viewed this 7-game losing streak more so as a measuring tool of what this team was stacked up against and if they could survive it. And right now it appears they are surviving it, and they were able to weather the storm long enough, and they got a lot of help from the teams that were chasing them. But if the Royals limp in this final month of the season, I think you look back to last year. The Diamondbacks and the Rangers were not playing good baseball when they got into the postseason. There were teams that had played much better in the month of September than those two teams. And yet, those are the two teams that made it into the World Series. I'm not saying the Royals are going to do the exact same thing, but what you can evaluate in baseball is that sometimes what you're worrying about in the regular season is something that just doesn't matter in October. Yeah, there will be strengths and weaknesses of every single team out there, and that's going to be exploited come October. But the 7-game losing streak, if the Royals make it in, I think you could say the 7-game losing streak impacted their chances at winning a division, but that's also something that's regular season based. Yes, you'll get the first round bye, you will get a home playoff game, but to me, no matter whether that game's played on the road, it's played at home, it's a completely different game. The lights are brighter, teams can crumble under that. Baltimore won 100 games last year and got swept out of the postseason by Texas, who was not playing that well, who had to back into the postseason, as some people were saying. It's all about hanging on at this point. You are just counting down the games, you are counting down the days, and every day the Royals win or their opposing teams that are chasing them lose is another lost day for those that are trying to catch them. If you can hang on in these final 3 weeks, you are going to get a really special opportunity to do some damage in October. I know that lost some power, that confidence in losing Vinny Pasquantino. But after tonight, when you just get that taste of victory again, it can make you feel a lot better about where this team could be headed once they get healthy. Okay, we're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, I believe the Royals can shake up their lineup a little bit. And tonight, we actually got a little bit of a tease into that. I'm going to tell you about it next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to one of our sponsors in eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience is the formula for winning championships, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make the car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. An eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Like I said in the opening segment, last night would have been a really good opportunity to do that extra episode because a lot of what we're talking about tonight would have made sense last night as well. And this talk about the lineup was kind of handled on its own with how the Royals constructed it. It is no secret that this group was sputtering at the plate without Vinny Pasquantino. Paul Hoover managed a few games in the series. Matt Quatrero was attending the services of the death of his mother, I believe it was. So that was obviously a more important situation, but so much had happened in the last week of players having injuries, missing time because of that. You have two different managers in there at a time. So the Royals had a lot of things just be thrown at them. Adversity, I guess you could call it. But this offense was the one thing that just wasn't really able to overcome a lot of that adversity. I thought the starting rotation during the losing streak did its job. Seth Lugo pitched well enough in both games to win both. Cole Reagans, before he imploded in the sixth inning, absolutely should have had more run support and likely would have had a different outcome if the Royals even gave him 2 to 3 runs in the first 5 innings, in which he struck out 8 straight guys. Brady Singer pitched well enough in his 2 starts during the losing streak. You look at Alec Marsh, not perfect, not awful. I don't really have too much of an issue of how he looked. Michael Walker pitched well enough on Monday as well. So the rotation did its job. And I think it gives you confidence that moving forward into these final 21 games and hopefully into the postseason, they're picking up steam and not running out of gas. But for the lineup, the Royals have always seemed to go back to the same guys. And, for platoon matchups with Adam Frazier and Garrett Hampson and Dairon Blanco, Matt Quatrero usually ran out the same lineup. And it didn't really bother me because after the first couple of times you go, okay, this is just the lineup he's going to run out there against lefties. He wants to load it up with a lot of righties. When he's facing a normal right-handed pitcher, you'll have the usual suspects in there. But I did think that the Royals, after last night, needed to be a little bit more creative at the top half of the order. I have no issue now with Tommy Pham leading off. He was really the spark and probably the sole reason as to why the Royals snapped that losing streak. I'll tip my cap to Seth Lugo, but the offense needed to have that spark, needed to have that fire, and Tommy Pham delivered in the game tonight. The rotation had been doing its job. Seth Lugo absolutely deserves a tip of the cap, but I think Royals fans and that team and those coaching staff or members of the coaching staff needed to see the offense do something special. So Tommy Pham leading off, I don't have an issue with. I don't have an issue with Robbie Grossman leading off when they face lefties because of those righty-lefty splits that he has in his career and, more importantly, this season. But where I looked at this lineup is the 3-hole. And Michael Massey did have an RBI single tonight. He tied the game at 1 apiece, and that was shortly before Tommy Pham had the 3-run home run to put the Royals ahead for good. But Michael Massey was a 3-hole hitter the other night. He did have a 10-pitch walk, but still, I think it was very obvious how Cleveland was handling throwing to Bobby Witt Jr. and throwing to Salvador Perez. Bobby Witt Jr. came up in a scenario on Tuesday night where he was representing the tying run. Tommy Pham had just let off the 6th inning with a double, and Tanner Bybee didn't throw him a strike. Nowhere near the zone. And the reason was, of course, it's Bobby Witt Jr., and even though he's slumping, you don't want to have him be the one to beat you. You'd rather face somebody else, and the guy behind Bobby Witt Jr. was Michael Massey. And earlier on in the 1st inning, there was a base open, and Tanner Bybee hit Salvador Perez on the shoulder. That was with an open base. I'm not saying it was intentional, but sometimes it just makes more sense to not waste any pitches. You plunk a guy in a meaty spot of their body, no harm, no foul. You face the next guy who's up right after him, and that was Paul DeJong, and Paul DeJong grounded out to Tanner Bybee. So to me, it showed that Cleveland was attacking those hitters by just not giving them much to hit. Salvador Perez did come up with the bases loaded in the 6th inning and nobody out, but there was nowhere to put him. He had to face Salvador Perez in that spot. And I really wanted to see the Royals give protection to the star of their lineup, the guy that makes this thing go, that has the wheels spinning, and that's Bobby Witt Jr. To me, it was moving Salvador Perez to the 3-hole, and if you wanted the lefty in the cleanup spot, you can go with MJ Melendez, you could go with Michael Massey, you can go with Robbie Grossman as a switch hitter. It really doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is that Bobby Witt Jr. can have protection in that lineup. I don't want Bobby Witt Jr. to be pitched around in situations like we saw on Tuesday night. I don't want to see Salvador Perez be plunked on the first pitch or worked around because there's nobody behind him. Paul DeJong can be a threat, but he also was slumping a little bit. And over the course of the entire season, he's not somebody I think you are shaking in your boots to face. It's not a knock on Paul DeJong, but you compare Paul DeJong to Salvador Perez. Salvador Perez is going to make you shake in your boots. Bobby Witt Jr. is going to make you shake in your boots. Paul DeJong and Robbie Grossman and Tommy Pham and Michael Massey, that whole collection of guys, they can be good hitters. They can come through for you, but pitchers aren't going to work around them. They're going to try to get you to swing at pitches that aren't as hittable, get you to fish out there, but also aren't afraid to just challenge you in the zone. They're not going to try to challenge Bobby Witt Jr. They're not going to try to challenge Salvador Perez unless they have to. If there's a base open and they don't have to face those guys, they're not going to throw them strikes. But for tonight, and the Royals offense didn't erupt, they got 4 runs. But we saw Bobby Witt Jr. in the 2-hole, Salvador Perez in the 3-hole, and then it was MJ Melendez hitting cleanup. To me, I'm not overly concerned who's hitting cleanup. I would rather have the protection for Bobby Witt Jr., and the second best hitter in this lineup is Salvador Perez. And you are going to have to throw Bobby Witt Jr. hittable pitches in that spot because, like that situation on Tuesday night, when Tommy Pham leads off with a double, you don't just want to put Bobby Witt Jr. on because you make Salvador Perez the go-ahead run at the plate with nobody out. Maybe he's an easier guy to face, which that is the case, than Bobby Witt Jr., but he's also been fantastic with runners in scoring position. It's a different story when the guy that's hitting after Bobby Witt Jr. is MJ Melendez, or Michael Massey or Paul DeYoung. Might not throw Bobby as many hittable pitches. And that's why I like seeing the lineup being shaken up a little bit. I would love to see Tommy Pham lead off the rest of the year, lead off against righties. And then when lefties are on the bump, they are starting that game, which isn't going to happen in this Minnesota series. So you might be looking to that Yankee series. And I'm not even sure if Nestor Cortez throws in that series. But to me, Robbie Grossman can lead off there. Bobby Witt Jr. and Salvi in the 2-3 spot. If it's a right-handed pitcher, I'd like to have maybe Melendez in the cleanup spot. Or if it's a left-handed pitcher, I'd like to see Renfroe in that spot when he comes back from his rehab assignment. And then you just go down the rest of the lineup there. 5-hole, you can have Paul DeYoung there. You could work in Yuli Gurriel at first base, Freddie Fermin, Kyle Isbell here and there, Dairon Blanco here and there. But to me, it's all about giving protection to Bobby Witt Jr., and we saw the Royals do that tonight, and they were able to snap their 7-game slide with a 4-1 win over the Cleveland Guardians. We're going to take our final break of the show, but thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On MLB podcast. Host Pat Sullivan, a.k.a. Sully, is here daily to provide national expertise with his trademark humor to help you get ready for the MLB playoffs here in the dog days of summer. Prepare for the Fall Classic with Sully, who has it all covered every single day on Locked On MLB. Available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. When we come back, is there any team that's chasing the Royals that you are scared of? I'll tell you if I'm scared of anybody next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. We got two sponsors that I want to give a shout out to, starting with PrizePicks. It's America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. It's also the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. And unlike other apps, on PrizePicks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 players' stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. And PrizePicks puts their member first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. When your picks hit, you can get the money in as quick as 15 minutes. So download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It is guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. Also want to give a shout out to Gametime, and there's still a few games left here on the homestand Friday, Saturday, and Sunday against the Minnesota Twins. A battle for second place in the American League Central. Should be some fantastic crowds out there at Kauffman Stadium. I'm definitely going to try to get out there to at least one of those games. Saturday will be on Fox, so hopefully a big turnout there. But if you're thinking about going to the game, whether it be by yourself, you're going with a group of people, go over to Gametime and buy your tickets there. They'll give you updates on what the prices look like. If you have your notifications on, I know that I do, so I can see if there's any new deals, new hot deals for the Royals game on that night. But it's not just baseball games. If you're going to the Chiefs game tomorrow night, go to Gametime, buy the tickets there. Maybe you're going to a college football game on Saturday, go there. If your concert, comedy show, whatever it can be, just go over to Gametime and buy your tickets. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off on your first purchase over at Gametime. In these final 21 games, I think it's going to make everybody tense, right? You are going to be really sweating it out until that final game happens, or the Royals can clinch a little bit before the final game of the year. And with a 5.5 game cushion over a few teams, you feel like they can clinch it in the final week, maybe even the final weekend before that final week of the regular season. But what you are likely doing at this point, and maybe it's just me, I know it's not just me for that matter, so I don't know why I said that. You're scoreboard watching around Major League Baseball. You are trying to keep up with what Boston's doing. You have been keeping up with what Boston's been doing for about the last 2 months. When it became acceptable to scoreboard watch, you are keeping tabs on Seattle. And for me, I've been keeping tabs on Seattle for about a month and a half. And recently, I would say in the last week, I started keeping tabs on Detroit. I wasn't really focused on Detroit when they were 7.5, 8.5 games back. That's just a huge, huge hill to conquer. And the Royals lost 7 in a row, and all of a sudden, you needed to be paying attention to what the Detroit Tigers were doing. And as I mentioned earlier, I was doing this podcast when the Tigers and Padres are still playing. There's no need to give a score update because it doesn't matter. You would know by the time you're watching this podcast. But I guess the question becomes, is there any team of that bunch that puts fear in you? That if the Royals don't right the ship against Minnesota and they continue to free fall against the Yankees and they struggle with the Pirates, and at that point it all comes down to, are the other teams losing? Who puts fear in you? To me, it's not Boston anymore. You know, we had a great Locked On crossover episode with Locked On Red Sox not too long ago, and that was a drastically different time period. That was when the Royals couldn't take a series from Boston, and Boston was on the heels, nipping at the heels of the Royals, and then Boston bottomed out because they've been putrid in the second half. Their bullpen has been the worst in baseball in the second half. And if you've got the worst bullpen in baseball, and things aren't really being pieced together for you anymore, you've been swept constantly in the second half, they're not the team that scares me anymore. And the Royals also don't see them anymore. So it's not like the Red Sox can make up ground themselves. That had already happened, a few weeks ago. Seattle doesn't strike fear in me because they're not great offensively. And I feel like when you are really trying to make some ground, and I say that, and they absolutely pummeled Oakland tonight. I think they had like 15 or 16 runs. It was absurd. But also Oakland was throwing some of their bottom guys in the bullpen toward the very end, and maybe that skewed the number a little bit. Still a very impressive performance by Seattle. Over the course of their entire season, though, a larger sample size than one game, their offense has been terrible. Their offense has been one of the worst in all of baseball, certainly one of the worst in the American League. And when you are back 5.5 games with 3 weeks to go, yeah, I would say that having a prolific offense is what is going to keep you in that race. You can't win every single game 3-2, 4-2, because you'll run into a team like San Diego or you'll run into a team like Baltimore. The Royals are very familiar with this, where they just have better offenses than you do. And they're going to be able to get your guy on even one of his better days. I looked to Houston this past weekend. I mean, the Royals got some really good outings from a handful of guys, and yet they were not able to take one of those 4 games. They were swept right out of Houston, and it was the second time this year that they had been swept. So Seattle, to me, is just not really going to strike fear. The Royals haven't or won't see him for the rest of the year, and I just think they're too wishy-washy, honestly. I don't think their rotation is as good on the road. Offensively, they've really struggled. So to me, it would take a drastic turnaround these final 21 games. Not impossible, because I do love that rotation of a lot of guys that are in there. But offensively, they've just been, really a train wreck all season long. And then you get to Detroit. If I did have to pick anybody, I think it would be Detroit, because they do have a really good rotation. They have gotten healthier. They got Riley Green and Kerry Carpenter back. They have a bullpen that can really be lights out. And a lot of guys throw upper 90s, triple digits, good movement there. And, the 2 guys that they got back from injury, that's going to help their offense a little bit. Can Spencer Torkelson, really revive this part of his season? It certainly is possible. And the Tigers get 3 more cracks at the Royals at Kauffman Stadium here in a few weeks. So if they hover around 3.5, 4.5 games, they go in there and sweep Kansas City at Kauffman Stadium, they're right there. But a lot still has to go right. I know they still play the White Sox. That's another reason why I would say they're the scariest team of the bunch, and they're the closest to the Royals as I wrap up this podcast episode right now. So I think the Tigers would be my answer, which is crazy to say. The American League Central has 4 teams this year that are fighting for playoff spots, and yet they have one of baseball's, if not sports, worst team in modern history in the Chicago White Sox. Truly just a wacky year in the American League Central. But I do tip my cap to the Detroit Tigers, who have made things very interesting in the American League wild card chase. Well, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. Now go check out the Locked On MLB podcast. Prepare for the Fall Classic with Sully, who has it all covered every single day. You can find the link to Locked On MLB in the description, so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Tomorrow, we're going to have a morning time episode and look ahead to this Minnesota series and some guys that may be coming back from injury and what they can do for this team. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.